Welcome to the Twinkl Talks EYFS podcast. Working in the early years is busy, funny, messy, and exhausting. Join me, Shana, some of the Twinkl EYFS team, special guest speakers, and other early years practitioners as we talk honestly about our experiences. Whether you're listening for CPD, on your commute, or to help you relax, Twinkl EYFS will share everything you need to know about all things early years.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Twinkl Talks EYFS with the Private Early Years team. My name's Katie.
And I'm Charlotte.
I'm Fliss.
And I'm Hannah.
And in today's episode, we're going to be helping you answer some of the questions that you are likely to be asked in your Ofsted. So this list of questions comes from Ofsted inspections that have actually happened, and these are some of the most common ones. And we're going to talk you through some of the things that you might want to include in your answers if you're asked. So something that has cropped up a lot is, how do you support children with SEND in your early years setting? So what kind of things would you guys reply to Ofsted with in that case?
Well, in my preschool, I was the SEND coordinator for a few months while I was there, and I did a lot of working with outside agencies, so the SALT team, speech and language, all of that, and it just meant arranging meetings for them to come in and observe the child, me having Teams meetings with the parents, keeping them involved, and doing a lot of one-to-one work with the child outside of the preschool room as well, and also in the room. So it was just a lot of observations, keeping in touch with different people and making sure the child was getting the extra support that they needed.
Yeah, and I think based on everything that you've said there, the key thing that comes through to me is that you're offering individualized support to the child and their particular learning needs and additional needs. Like, everything you do for them is adapted to suit them and their needs. And I think that's really making sure that the strategies you put in your room or your setting are very much inclusive. So your room scenario setup is accessible by every other child as well.
In my session, we used to have a sort of a one-page plan about what the child's interests were, what their needs were. And that was a really good way of like demonstrating quite quickly to an Ofsted inspector, like, this is the child, this is what we're working on, this is kind of maybe triggers, or this is what we're working on with them. And that also meant that the whole team in the room knew what was going on with that child, not just their key person.
Yeah, my setting was similar to yours, Hannah, where the Senko worked with the key person of the child who had SEN, and they made the educational healthcare plan, and they updated that, I think, monthly or depending on the child's needs, and they had like what they were working towards or like what their needs were, and then they were doing like observations to keep track. But then we were all made aware as practitioners in the room, so even if it wasn't your key child, the child is still in your care, so we all had to be aware of the plan, even though the observations and stuff were down to the key person. And I also think that's really important as well, because especially when you're covering other rooms, like we had a child in the preschool room and you go in and you needed to know what kind of they were doing to support, so you could support when you were covering in that room as well.
I think that's a really good point that you both touched on there, actually, is that making it clear to everyone in your room what's going on. It's not just the key worker that works with an individual child, like every member of staff in the room does. So everybody needs to be following their My Plan or their EHCP, whatever is in place in your setting. I think that's a really important point to focus on.
And I think something else is sort of talking to Ofsted inspectors about the things you've put in place across your room. So it might be Makaton that all the children are doing, so that you're including the children who maybe need that, but also the children who don't, they're learning that skill as well. So kind of those wider strategies that you're using to support SEN children.
That's such a good point. I think a common thread of what we'll see in this question and in the other questions that we're going to look at is that initially the question might feel quite overwhelming, but once you take a second to step back and think about it, it's stuff that you naturally do as part of your practice that Ofsted are asking you. It's not anything untowards or something you're going to have to fib about. From what we've all said, this is just very natural, normal stuff that everyone will probably be doing anyway, so that's really reassuring to hear.
Well, I remember from my Ofsted preparation in my nursery, we always like to give examples of things. So like when they ask the question, like you would say like how you support, but then maybe you could show them like certain things, or say to them, oh, maybe you pop back in the room later and you can see this strategy in action. I think it's good to like give them examples as well.
I got to love that one. Pop back in later. That's like, I'm not afraid. You can come and watch me anytime.
Act confident.
Or a strategy to move them out from it.
Yeah, so you're facing the inspector head on, like, that's right, I want to be observed.
So Ofsted may also ask you how you work with parents and carers in your early years setting. So how would you guys form that relationship in your settings?
I think there are lots of different ways to do it, but I think the way that I found most easiest was using our app. So we had an electronic app, and the best way to keep in touch with parents, because we would often find at handover they're rushing off to get to work, and when they're collecting everyone's rushing to get home because you've had enough of the day. So we would find that the app was a really strong point of contact for us, and that parents, when they take a second to stop at work or when they've got a minute, they can just message you with a little update saying, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you this from home. But in that same way, we could also message them with any pictures. If they had any concerns, it could be addressed quickly. I just found that the apps are a really good point, whether they were taking an observation at home for us to include on like assessments or reports, or it was just that quick day-to-day communication. I found that was a really useful way that technology's evolved for us over the years.
I think social media is another really good one. And something that's always stuck with me from a training I did was that they said that obviously Ofsted inspectors generally know they're coming to visit your settings. So they might have a little look on your Facebook or another social media account like the night before they're coming, just to get a feel of your setting and what you've been up to. So it's kind of mindful of like the sort of things that you're putting on social media, and also thinking about like what's the value of that for parents, and actually thinking about, is it useful for parents? What are they getting from that information? So if you're sharing like activities that parents can do at home to support their learning, that's going to be a really good link for Ofsted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we use social media in my settings, it was literally just to put up pictures of what the children have done that day, which is also good, you know, for having that communication with parents and caregivers, because they can still get to feel like they're involved in what they're doing. But I've never thought of it from the perspective of actually social media can be used to work with your families to enhance what you've been doing at the setting, so they can see that, they see a wider range of pictures, and they can develop that at home. So it's such a good idea to include extra things in the captions of what you can do.
We also used apps as well, and we did like a daily diary. But I think a lot of our parents were quite happy to talk on handovers, so sometimes they wouldn't necessarily see the daily diary that we'd like put up. They sometimes prefer like a conversation on the door, so that was like quite a big point of contact for us. And also when we had children who had like English as an additional language, we had to work with the parents quite a lot there, because well, I got parents to like tell us about like their favorite food, what they eat in like their nationality, to help them feel more included. But having that open communication about the additional language that they've got, they can then support you in the setting to support the child. So even just like a handful of words in their language is really useful, so involving them in processes like that.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And like you said, actually, the probably, which we haven't touched on so far with mine and Hannah's answers, but actually the easiest way to communicate with parents and families is face to face, because they're there in front of you. So other ways that can be done is like if your setting does settling in sessions, that's a really great way that you like initially form contact and relationships with families. Or some settings do parents' evening, stay in play sessions. We always used to do Mother's Day, Father's Day, Grandfather's Day, etc. tea parties where we just have the opportunity to invite them in. So there are so many different ways to create those connections and continue to build them with families.
My current setting does like a weekly newsletter as well that goes out to parents, just like a summary of like what each room's been doing, and an update of like who's off next week on holiday staff wise, or like things coming up. And then on the side it also has like videos of like things they can do at home and links to other stuff. So I think that was a new one I'd not seen until I was working in my current setting. But you could even like show Ofsted that, like you say that you do newsletters, and give them an example of what sort of thing you're doing to form that relationship with parents.
Exactly. And that's a great point, is that often these things that you're doing, when you do have a physical example that you can show them, if they're happy to see it, why not give them the opportunity to have a look? It's just going to make you look even better. I think that's wonderful. I also really like that the newsletter tells parents when staff are off, because it would always be a surprise if they don't know, wouldn't it? They'll come in expecting to speak to person A, for example, but you're like, person A is not here all week.
No, so it's also handy for us as staff, because we can like I can see, or who's not in next week, when I'm just doing like a relief staff member. I'm like, oh, who's not here? It's good to know.
Yeah, it's just good planning for everyone. So actually, when you've got the clear communication with parents and caregivers, actually that means clear communication with staff as well, because then everybody's on the same page, and that's only a bonus.
So whilst the inspectors wandering around your room, they could see an activity that you're doing with the children or a type of provision you've got out, and they might ask you questions such as how do you feel that activity went, or what did the children get from this? Is there anything else you would have done differently to reflect on the activity? So what would you answer?
My first thing would be not to panic at that question, because I always think when you've done something and someone asks you about it, you can feel a little bit attacked. So don't assume that they're asking you because you did a terrible job. Like, assume that they're coming at it from you did a great job and they just want to know a little bit more, because that's how I've always felt during an Ofsted inspection. So one of the first things that I would be thinking about is the things that went well. And I would talk to them about what I think went well and why. So what was my input in it going well? What was set up in the activity or the questioning or the general environment that helped things go smoothly and well and achieve the learning objectives. So I think start with your positives for sure.
And I think make sure you explain like why you're doing that activity. Has it come from a next step? Is it an interest? Like make them aware why that activity is happening as well.
I think as well you can link it to like the Ofsted 3 Eyes. So you could say to sort of explain what your intent was and the impact, and sort of go at it from that aspect as well, so they can kind of see that you have put thought into what you're wanting to get out of the activity.
I love that. Mic drop for Charlotte. She's dropping in the Ofsted keywords. They're going to be like, woo! Give them an outstanding.
And we have an Ofsted 3 Eyes template online if you'd like to check it out.
I also think make sure that you're considering the children's next steps when it comes to planning your activity, so that if Ofsted do ask you about it, like Hannah said, that really links to their interests. You really can say, I thought about this because I noticed last week child A was having difficulty zipping up their coat. So this week we made a sensory board with buttons and zips to work on their fine motor skills. And I could see that that went well. So next week we're going to move on to scissors. Make sure that you've got that flow going. You should constantly be observing and assessing the children anyway. So this is probably stuff that you already know. It's just actually verbalizing it can be the tricky bit sometimes. Is there anything extra that you guys would think about wanting to say in that situation?
I think if maybe it didn't go as planned and they maybe observed that a child wasn't as involved as that you maybe hoped, you could then speak about that and like maybe reflect on the activity and think about why that child wasn't involved as much. Is it maybe an area they don't normally go over to, so maybe you've introduced messy play to them and they're not a massive fan of that? You can just reflect on the activity and how you know the child, to maybe think about why they weren't as involved as you'd hoped, or maybe something else was going on in the room and they wanted to go over there. And obviously we don't want to force them to come and do an activity, so that's fine, and I'm sure Ofsted will understand that if you explain that to them.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I do see that a lot on social media where people have had their observations from Ofsted and Ofsted have then flagged to them afterwards being like, this child wasn't involved. That happened to a friend of mine in her recent inspection. So you're right, you want to be able to say, if that does come up, and maybe even before they've said anything, you want to be able to say, this child wasn't involved, we'd do this differently next time, or as a result, I'm going to do this. So you're right. Actually, definitely focus on the positives, but if something hasn't gone right or quite to plan, own it immediately and say, this is how I would improve. And that's all that can be asked of anyone.
So something else that an Ofsted inspector might want to talk to you about is what informs your practice. So has anyone got any thoughts on that?
Yes, there are so many things that can inform your practice, and I think a lot of the time we don't even notice it. So for example, for me, social media is something I use a lot in my spare time. It's a place where I get a lot of my most recent news and updates about what's happening in the early years sector. But then I also use things like Pinterest to get ideas and activity inspiration, which of course I then adapt to the children in my setting. But social media is a really powerful tool, and there are lots of different ways it can be used to inform what you do every day as a practitioner.
I think as well, just following what your children are interested in is just something so simple that sometimes you do forget about. You can just observe what the children are enjoying at the time and just go with that. And then if you've got any like events coming up or anything that you think can, intertwine with all that, you can mix it together and hit two things in one. Go with the flow. Sometimes I used to say, just kind of go, see where it takes you.
Yeah, and I think you're right that quite often the events and celebrations can be influenced by children's interests, like by exposing them to different events and celebrations that are coming up in your setting. You might develop their interests. So at the time of our recording this, it's when the Euros have not long finished. So I imagine a lot of children, because of this event, have expressed an interest in football that might not have been there 6+ weeks ago. So actually those two can go hand in hand. So there's nothing wrong with taking the lead from an event or celebration and using that to inform your practice and your planning.
I also think as well, Ofsted will be looking at how you talk about your curriculum as well, your settings curriculum. They want to see that what the managers said in the learning walk, the nursery's curriculum is reflected in each room. So if you like drop them words about what your curriculum is, so say if yours is all a focus on communication and language, especially in like the baby and the toddler rooms, you can demonstrate that and say like, our practice in this room is informed by the curriculum. So we focus a lot on communication and language, which you can see over here in this activity, this provision. Ofsted will see that link between what the managers said in the learning walk and what you're actually doing in the room, and they'll be like, tick, outstanding.
Yeah, that's a ding, 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 10 out of 10. Give everyone a sticker. That's a perfect response.
And I think talk about training as well that you might have been on. So like going to a training is great, but then being able to talk about how it's informed your practice. So maybe linking to communication and language, like this was talking about. You know, you might have learned something, talk about how you've come back and implemented it in your setting and how that's changed your practice.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So these are just a couple of the questions that you could be asked by Ofsted, and therefore it's only a couple of the answers. I would really recommend that you go onto the Twinkl website and type in Ofsted questions and answers for early years practitioners, as it comes up with a comprehensive list. And this looks at so many different areas. It goes from safeguarding to the curriculum to parent involvement to pedagogy. It covers so many different things, and it's a truly helpful resource for early years practitioners. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Twinkl Talks EYFS. As always, you can find us on a variety of platforms and social media, including Facebook, Facebook groups, X, YouTube, Pinterest, TikTok. If it exists, we're probably on it. And we'll see you in a few weeks. Bye.
Bye.
So that's it for today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you would like to join in or would like to know more, then come and find us on our social media sites. We have a Facebook page, Facebook groups, an Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. All the links of where to find us will be in our podcast description. Come and join the conversation. And whatever you're doing today, I hope you have a great day.